4 men attacked a billionaire in a restaurant, then froze when they saw who the 15-year-old black boy was. Quiet, everyone. Phone's on the table now. The voice cut through the elegant buzz of La Renaissance like a knife. 4 men wearing maintenance company overalls had just locked the front door of Manhattan's most expensive restaurant. Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries and one of the richest women in the country, barely had time to process what was happening. She was dining alone at her favorite corner table when she felt the cold barrel of a gun pressed against her back. "You're going to transfer us $50 million now or we'll start shooting his rich friends," whispered the leader of the robbers, a burly man with a scar on his face. At the next table, a black boy of only 15 was calmly chewing his hamburger. He wore a simple school uniform and had a worn backpack at his feet. He seemed completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. "Hey, kid!" shouted one of the robbers, pointing his gun at the cell phone on the table. "Are you deaf?" The boy, whose name was Daniel Reeves, slowly looked up. There was no fear there, just a disturbing, almost tedious serenity, as if being in an armed robbery was as common as waiting for the bus. "I'm listening," he replied calmly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I was just finishing my meal. My father always said that wasting food is disrespectful to those who have nothing to eat." The comment about his father made something flicker in his eyes. A deep, painful memory. 3 months ago, General Marcus Reeves had died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was a heart attack, but Daniel knew the truth. His father had uncovered a corruption scheme that went all the way to the top and paid with his life. The flashbacks came in bursts, his father teaching him military strategy in the backyard. "Observe everything, son. The environment, the exits, the enemy's weak points." The deep voice echoed in his mind as his eyes discreetly scanned the restaurant. "What a funny kid," the leader sneered, approaching him. "Let's see if you're still funny after I—" "Sir," Daniel interrupted, his voice still annoyingly calm, "you have approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds before the police arrive. The silent alarm system was activated when you forced that door open." The robber froze. "How do you know that?" "Basic observation. The manager discreetly tapped his watch 3 times when you entered. Standard panic code. I saw it in the security manuals my father used to bring home." For a second, there was silence. Then the leader laughed, a cruel, disbelieving laugh. "Look, we have a genius here. A kid from the suburbs who thinks he's smart." He turned to Victoria. "Transfer now, or the first shot will be to this smart-ass kid's head." Victoria trembled, picking up the phone with shaking hands. Her eyes met Daniel's for a second. The boy blinked once deliberately, then looked at the chandelier above the leader's head, then at the fire extinguisher on the wall, then back at her. It was silent language, a plan being communicated without words. Victoria had built a billion-dollar empire by reading people and situations. And something about that boy, his upright posture, his calculating gaze, his absolute lack of fear, told her he was no ordinary victim. He was something else entirely. "I need my digital reader to make the transfer," she said, her voice taking on a strange firmness. "It's in my bag." "Slow down," he ordered, taking a step back. That's when Daniel moved. It wasn't a rash teenage move. It was precise, calculated, almost robotic in its efficiency. 1 second he was sitting. The next, he had kicked the table leg with exact force, sending the leader's plate flying straight into his face. A man screamed, momentarily blinded by hot sauce. Daniel didn't stop. He grabbed the chair and threw it at the chandelier above them. Glass and crystal exploded, raining down on the robbers and creating instant chaos. "Back door now," he shouted to Victoria, who didn't hesitate. The other 3 assailants reacted, but their weapons were now a problem. With the hostages running in panic, they had no clear targets. One of them fired at the ceiling, trying to regain control. Daniel was already on the move again. He grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed foam directly into the shooter's face. The man staggered, blinded and coughing. "Damn, kid!" roared another, lunging forward. But Daniel didn't fight like a scared teenager. His movements were trained, precise. Block, parry, counterattack. Exactly at the pressure points his father had taught him during years of informal military training. The burly assailant fell to his knees, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. Daniel was already backing away, creating distance. "You guys picked the wrong restaurant," he said, his voice still calm, almost polite. "And you definitely picked the wrong person to threaten in front of me." The leader, still wiping sauce from his eyes, finally saw him clearly. He saw the military posture, the precision of the movements, the total absence of hesitation that only comes from extensive training. Who the hell are you?" he stammered. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the entrance where sirens could now be heard. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He had calculated it almost perfectly. Victoria, now standing safely near the kitchen, watched in awe. That boy, who she had assumed was just a middle-class student dining alone, had just diffused a situation that could have ended in tragedy. 3 minutes, Daniel announced, checking an imaginary watch. "I suggest you drop your weapons before my colleagues arrive." His colleagues? The leader scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Daniel smiled. Not a teenage smile, but something much older, wiser. "My father was General Marcus Reeves, commander of the 5th Special Operations Division." He paused, letting the name sink in. "He may be dead, but his men still look after the family, and they don't like it very much when someone threatens the general's son." That was when the kitchen door opened. They weren't police officers. They were 3 military-built men dressed in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable posture of soldiers. They said nothing. They just positioned themselves strategically, surrounding the robbers. The leader turned pale. He recognized military training when he saw it. "Drop your weapons on the floor." "Hands on your heads," ordered the oldest of the 3 in a voice that brooked no argument. The robbers obeyed, finally realizing they had made a catastrophic mistake. Daniel calmly returned to his table and picked up his backpack. Inside it, Victoria could see briefly. There was something that made her choke. Military documents, surveillance photos, a notebook with files labeled Operation Cleanup. This boy was not in the restaurant by accident. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner, Miss Ashford," Daniel said politely, as if he hadn't just foiled an armed robbery. "I hope we can talk after the police are done here. I have some questions about your involvement with DEFCON Industries." Victoria's blood ran cold. DEFCON Industries, the private defense contractor that had government contracts. The same company his father had been investigating before he died. Daniel was already leaving, but he paused at the door and looked back. "Oh, and Miss Ashford, don't try to run. We have people at every exit in this city. My father taught me well. Always have a plan B, C, and D. The robbers were being handcuffed." But Victoria now realized that they might just be pawns in a much bigger game, a game that he, a seemingly ordinary teenager, was playing with the mastery of a general. And the question echoing in her mind was terrifying. If Daniel Reeves was 15 and already like this, what exactly had his father trained him to be? If you're wondering how a boy managed to turn the table so quickly, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the truth about who Daniel Reeves really is and what he's planning goes far beyond a simple heroic rescue. That was just the beginning. 3 hours later at the police station, Victoria Ashford signed the final documents of her statement with hands that were still shaking slightly. Detective Reynolds closed the folder with a sigh of relief. "Ms. Ashford, you were incredibly lucky to have that boy in the restaurant," he said admiringly. 15 years old, and he acted like a trained operative. Victoria forced a smile, but her mind was working at full speed. Daniel Reeves wasn't luck. He was a very calculated and dangerous threat. When she walked out the back door of the police station, she found her private attorney, James Peterson, waiting by the limousine. "I need you to investigate everything about Daniel Reeves. Father, mother, school, medical history. I want to know even what brand of toothpaste he uses," Victoria ordered as she got into the car. "I've already started," James replied, handing her a tablet. "General Marcus Reeves, deceased 3 months ago. Official cause, massive heart attack. But here's the interesting part. Victoria, read quickly. The general had been the Pentagon's internal audit director, investigating irregular military contracts. His last investigation focused precisely on DEFCON Industries." "My God," she murmured, the blood freezing in her veins. DEFCON Industries was one of the country's leading suppliers of military technology, and Victoria, through carefully structured shell companies, was the largest individual shareholder. Very few people knew this or should have known. "The boy mentioned DEF CON," she said, her voice low and tense. "He knows." James adjusted his glasses nervously. "Victoria, if the general found out about the overpriced contracts, the unauthorized weapons tests, the kickbacks to senators—" Silence. She cut him off, looking at the driver. Not a word about that in the car, but it was too late for silence. Her cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Hello, Ms. Ashford. Thank you for not mentioning our agreement to the police. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Coffee Corner on 5th Avenue. We need to talk about the future of DEF CON and yours." Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. How did that kid have her private number? She typed quickly. "I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not threatened by children." The reply came instantly. "Neither was my father." But 72 hours after confronting him about the $840 million embezzled in phantom equipment maintenance, he was dead. Coincidences are fascinating, don't you think? Victoria deleted the message with trembling fingers. How did he know the exact amount? Those documents were locked in supposedly impenetrable digital safes. "I won't," she said aloud, more to herself. It's blackmail from a teenager traumatized by his father's death. But even as she said it, her mind was already calculating the damage. If Daniel had evidence, and he clearly had access to information he shouldn't, a scandal would destroy not only DEF CON, but her entire fortune. 3 decades of empire building reduced to ashes. The next day at 2:45 p.m., Victoria was sitting in Coffee Corner wearing sunglasses and a scarf. A ridiculous disguise that any professional paparazzo would see through. But it wasn't the press she was worried about. Daniel arrived punctually at 3 p.m., school backpack on his back, crumpled uniform, worn sneakers. He looked exactly like what he was, a black teenager from the suburbs, except for his eyes. Those eyes contained a calculating coldness that Victoria had only seen in boardrooms and courtrooms. He sat down without being invited, ordering a hot chocolate as if they were discussing a math test. "You know," Daniel began casually, "my dad used to take me fishing every Sunday. He said patience was a strategist's greatest weapon. Wait for the fish to bite, son. Don't force it. Let him think he's in control." Victoria didn't respond, her jaw tense. "He spent 3 years discreetly investigating you," Daniel continued, stirring the chocolate with a straw. "He created 47 false identities to infiltrate shell companies. He tracked transfers through 12 tax havens. He recorded 89 hours of compromising conversations." "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria said, but her voice came out hoarse. Daniel smiled, not a teenage smile, but something predatory. "Of course you do. That's why you sent that heart attack to my father. You have no proof." "A private autopsy showed digitalis in his blood. It causes instant heart attack. Virtually undetectable in routine tests, except when you know exactly what to look for." Daniel slid a thin folder across the table. "This is a copy. The originals are in 17 different secure locations." Victoria opened the folder with trembling hands. There were medical reports, toxicology analyses, even photos of the body during the private autopsy. Her world began to crumble. "What do you want?" she asked, defeated. "Justice," Daniel replied simply. "My father dedicated 30 years to serving this country. He was killed because he found out you were profiting from the deaths of American soldiers, selling defective equipment, and pocketing the difference. I could destroy you," Victoria hissed, regaining some composure. "You're a minor. This illegally obtained evidence would never be admissible in court, and I have unlimited resources. Lawyers who would make your life hell." "You're right," Daniel interrupted calmly. "Court would be complicated. That's why I'm not going to use the courts." He pulled a laptop out of his backpack, opening it to reveal a web page. It was an investigative blog with millions of followers specializing in exposing corporate corruption. Kenneth Morrison, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, former Marine who served under his father in Iraq. Daniel turned the laptop around. One word from him, and tomorrow morning 12 million people will wake up reading "The Billionaire Who Killed a General." Victoria felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. "You can't prove I ordered. I don't need to prove it in court. I just need to raise enough suspicion. You know how it works. Media scandal, federal investigation, panicked shareholders, plummeting stock prices. Daniel closed the laptop. Your empire built on the blood of soldiers would crumble in 72 hours. There was a long, heavy silence. Victoria realized with growing horror that she was cornered by a 15-year-old boy. All her connections, all her money, all her power, useless against someone who had nothing to lose. But here's what's going to happen, Daniel said, his voice taking on an almost professorial tone. You're going to transfer 51% of DEF CON shares to a fund controlled by veterans, the men and women my father commanded. You're going to publicly resign from the board, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. That's extortion, Victoria stammered. No, Daniel said evenly. That's restitution. Daniel stood up, throwing $5 on the table for the hot chocolate. You have 48 hours or the whole world finds out that Victoria Ashford made billions while soldiers died using equipment she knew was defective. As he turned to leave, Victoria managed to find her voice. How? How did a 15-year-old boy accomplish all this? Daniel paused, looking back with an expression that mixed pain and determination. My father started training me when I was 6. Military strategy, forensic analysis, computer programming, cryptography. He knew he was dealing with dangerous people. So, he prepared me for the day he wouldn't be here to protect me. A single tear rolled down his cheek, the first real emotion Victoria had seen. He turned her into her ultimate weapon of revenge. Every lesson, every training session, every secret shared, all building up to this moment. Daniel wiped away the tear angrily. You didn't just kill my father. Ms. Ashford, you created the very instrument of your own destruction. And with that, he left, leaving Victoria sitting alone with the weight of decades of crimes finally catching up with her. As she looked out the window, watching Daniel disappear into the city crowd, a terrifying question echoed in her mind. If a 15-year-old boy had managed this alone, what else was planned that she didn't yet know about? The truth, more frightening than any blackmail, was that she had completely underestimated not only Daniel, but the legacy of military strategy left behind by a general who was always 3 steps ahead of his enemies, even after death. Victoria Ashford didn't get to the top by being passive. 2 hours after the meeting at the cafe, she had already mobilized her best resources: a private investigator and former FBI agent, 3 lawyers specializing in suppressing scandals, and a hacker hired to find where Daniel kept the evidence. He's a 15-year-old boy, she said on the phone to her head of security. No resources, no real connections. Find the files and make them disappear discreetly. But what Victoria didn't know was that every move of hers was being tracked. In a modest apartment in Brooklyn, Daniel watched 3 computer screens simultaneously. At his side, Captain James Rodriguez, a veteran who had served 20 years under his father's command, pointed to one of them. She just hired Secure Trace Investigations, Rodriguez said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Same company that investigated your father's death and conveniently found nothing suspicious. Daniel nodded, taking notes in a notebook already filled with information. In the last 3 months since his father's death, he hadn't been alone for a second. His father's men, 17 veterans who owed their lives to the general, had become his extended family, invisible guardians, and relentless teachers. She'll try to scare me first, Daniel muttered, analyzing patterns. Then if that fails, physical elimination. That's her pattern. Rodriguez pulled up another screen. We found the accountant she used to launder the bribe money. Thomas Chun lives in Seattle. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. A thin smile crossed Daniel's face. My father always said, the fatal mistake of arrogant generals is to believe they are fighting alone against a lone enemy. The next morning, Victoria found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a single photo, her leaving the building where her personal lawyer lived, taken less than an hour ago. On the back was a message in elegant cursive. Ms. Ashford, every move is watched. Every call is heard. Give up while you can still choose how you fall. D. She crumpled the paper in anger, but her hands were shaking. How did he know where she would be? Her private investigator, Mitchell Barnes, called at that moment. Ms. Ashford, I found something disturbing about the boy. Go on. He's not alone. We've identified at least 12 military veterans taking turns watching him, all former special forces. One of them is James Rodriguez, a cyber warfare expert who worked on classified operations in the Middle East. Victoria felt the floor disappear beneath her. And that's just the ones we've been able to identify. There are indications that the network is much larger. Barnes hesitated. Ms. Ashford, this isn't a traumatized teenager seeking revenge. This is a full-scale military operation. General Reeves. He prepared her for this. She hung up abruptly, her mind racing. If Daniel had a team of trained operatives protecting him, any attempt to silence him physically would be suicide. There was only one option left. Discredit him publicly before he could expose her. Victoria activated her public relations department. I want a full campaign. Teenager disturbed by his father's death, obsessed with conspiracy theories, possibly dangerous. Plant the narrative on blogs, social media, everywhere. But Daniel was 3 steps ahead. When the first defamatory posts began to appear online, he already had his response ready. Not with desperate denials, but with a simple video. He's sitting in a modest room, school uniform, looking like an ordinary boy. My name is Daniel Reeves. I am 15 years old, and my father, General Marcus Reeves, died 3 months ago investigating corruption in military contracts, he began, his voice calm but firm. In the coming days, you will see attempts to discredit me. They will say I am disturbed, dangerous, obsessed. But remember, desperate people do desperate things, and the truth always finds the light. The video was posted on an anonymous account and strategically shared. Within 6 hours, it had 2 million views. The David versus Goliath narrative, a young black man taking on a powerful billionaire, instantly captured the public's imagination. Victoria watched in horror as her smear campaign backfired. Every attempt to attack him only increased public sympathy for him. How is he doing this? She shouted at her PR team. The answer came in the form of another envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a note. 48 hours became 24. The transfer or exposure. Choose wisely. P.S. Your propaganda efforts have only accelerated my timeline. Victoria inserted the flash drive with trembling hands. It was a preview, just 30 seconds of what Daniel had. Audio recordings of her discussing bribes with senators, emails about defective equipment being deliberately sent to combat zones, and worse, a photo of her meeting with a man known in intelligence circles as the Fixer, an expert at making problems disappear. The photo was dated 2 days before General Reeves's death. She vomited right there in her $200 million office. Daniel wasn't bluffing. He never had been. And now she realized the full extent of her naivety. While she thought she was negotiating with a grieving teenager, he was actually at war with the last and most lethal operation planned by a dead general, an operation that had turned her own son into an unstoppable weapon of justice. The secret preparation was not Daniel's alone. It was the work of 18 veterans, 3 years of silent investigation, and a meticulously crafted plan that was now unfolding with military precision. Victoria finally understood she had not just killed a man. She had murdered a general. And generals do not die without leaving behind devastating posthumous strategies. 23 hours and 50 minutes after the ultimatum, Victoria Ashford stood before her lawyer, signing the documents, transferring DEFCON's shares with hands that trembled uncontrollably. This is extortion, she repeated for the 10th time, her voice breaking. It's restitution, replied Daniel, sitting across the table in a neutral office. At his side, his colleague Kenneth Morrison, the investigative journalist, watched everything with the sharp eyes of a predator. Victoria scribbled her final signature. Done, you win. Now give me the evidence. Daniel smiled. Not the smile of a teenager, but of a strategist who had just executed a perfect checkmate. The evidence, Ms. Ashford, this was never about silencing your truth. It was about ensuring you were heard in the right way. He motioned to Morrison, who opened his laptop. On the screen was a formatted article ready for publication, The Billionaire Who Killed a General, How Victoria Ashford Profited from Soldiers' Blood. Victoria felt the floor disappear beneath her. You said if I transferred the shares, I said you had 48 hours. You had 24. Daniel interrupted coldly. "And I said you could choose how to fall. You chose to try to destroy me first. Remember smear campaigns, private investigators, attempts to hack our servers." "Her every move was monitored," Rodriguez added, entering the room with a thick folder, "including the meeting you had yesterday with Victor Clove, the same fixer who poisoned his father." Victoria paled. "You can't prove—" "We recorded everything," Rodriguez said, opening the briefcase and spreading photos across the table. Victoria in a discreet cafe. Victoria handing over an envelope. Victoria receiving a disposable phone. Directional cameras, parabolic microphones, GPS tracking, military technology has its advantages. "But here's the best part," Daniel continued, his voice thick with cold satisfaction. "You weren't just trying to silence me. You were planning to eliminate Kenneth as well. A car accident was scheduled for tomorrow morning." Morrison smiled grimly. "Too bad I work with a team. If anything happens to me, 3 other journalists will publish immediately." Victoria was in total collapse now. "What do you want? More money? Everything I have?" "Justice," Daniel replied simply. "Tomorrow at 6 a.m., this article goes live. At 7 a.m., the FBI will receive all the evidence of corruption, murder, and attempted murder. At 8 a.m., every senator you bribed will receive a copy of the financial records." He paused, letting the weight sink in. "At 9 a.m., when the markets open, Ashford Industries stock will plummet. Your investors will flee. Your allies will deny knowing you, and you will experience exactly what my father felt, watching everything he built being destroyed while he was powerless to stop it. My father spent 3 years documenting your crimes while soldiers died using equipment you knew was defective. How many families destroyed? How many widows? How many orphans?" He stood up, walking until he was face to face with her. "You killed my father because he discovered the truth." He turned to face her. "You killed my father because he discovered the truth. You made me an orphan at 15, and you thought you could continue your billionaire lifestyle without consequences." Victoria was devastated, sobbing openly. "Now please, I have a family." "And his father had a son," Daniel replied emotionlessly. "The difference is that your family will live on, just poor, humiliated, and possibly visiting you in federal prison." Morrison closed the laptop. "It's time." Daniel turned to leave but paused at the door. "Ms. Ashford, there's a lesson here you never learned. True power doesn't come from money or connections. It comes from integrity, strategy, and loyal allies. You had billions, but you were completely alone. I had only the memory of an honorable father and an army of people willing to fight for the truth." As he left, Victoria remained alone in the empty office. The empire that took decades to build crumbling around her. The next morning, the headlines exploded across every newspaper, website, and news channel. Victoria Ashford's fall was as spectacular as her rise had been, and at the center of it all was a 15-year-old boy who had turned grief into justice and revenge into legacy. 6 months later, Daniel Reeves turned 16, not as an invisible orphan, but as the director of the newly created General Reeves Fund, a billion-dollar foundation dedicated to investigating military corruption and supporting veterans' families. The shares transferred from DEFCON now financed quality equipment for soldiers, while Victoria Ashford served 25 years in federal prison for murder, corruption, and attempted murder. Kenneth Morrison won his 2nd Pulitzer for the investigative series that exposed not only Victoria, but an entire network of military fraud that spanned 3 decades. Daniel visited his father's grave every week. "We did it, Dad," he whispered, placing fresh flowers. "Justice not only for you, but for all those soldiers." The lesson was crystal clear. True power does not come from wealth or connections, but from unwavering integrity and loyal allies willing to fight for what is right. Victoria had billions, but she was completely alone when she fell. Daniel had only the memory of an honorable father, and he turned that into an army of justice. The best revenge was never to destroy those who hurt you. It was to build a legacy so powerful that it turned tragedy into hope for thousands. If this story of courage, strategy, and justice has touched your life, subscribe to the channel, because sometimes a 15-year-old boy with the right training can bring down empires built on blood and lies.